knowing yourself is not a crime. It doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you. It's in fact a normal part of everyday living, is to work towards knowing ourselves. And we've forgotten that, and we need to return that into our lives from an early age onwards.
Hi, good day, and welcome back to the new episode on the Transformative Purpose podcast. I'm truly honored, excited, and pleased that I'm reconnecting with one of the lecturers who used to teach me in one of my subjects at MGSM, Macquarie Graduate School of Management in Australia, more than 12 years ago now. Dr. Segal is a registered psychologist, and he used to teach me foundation of management thought. It's my great pleasure to have him on the call, and I can't wait to have this conversation with Stephen. Stephen is a specialist in anxiety and depression, two of the common topics that we talk a lot about in the society. And I'm looking forward to understand a bit more about these two subjects. What are some of the things that people can do to prevent that? And if you are diagnosed with anxiety and depression, what is the right path? What are the solutions? Stephen, welcome to have you here. And it's good to reconnect again after so long.
Thanks very much, Aaron, and thanks very much for inviting me. I look forward to our discussion on anxiety and depression. Yeah.
It is a turbulent world, isn't it? How do you see the world like it is today? I mean, compared to when we first met 12, 13 years ago, the world has changed, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that what's often left out in discussions of anxiety and depression is, in fact, that the world provides a context for anxiety. So anxiety is not just something that's suffered because one has psychological issues. Anxiety has philosophical and sociological and cultural dimensions as well. And I guess that's the first theme that I would like to speak about a little bit. And I'd like to highlight two or three things. Firstly, is the fact that we become a highly individualized world. In many senses, we are alone. If you take the notion of a career, for example, let's say 50 years ago, you knew exactly where you would begin the career, and you knew exactly where you'd end the career. So the path of career development was very safe and secure. But today that's not the case anymore. No matter where we are, we can't read our future exactly. So inevitably, many and perhaps most of us will go through some kind of disruptions in our career. We might think that it's set for life, but after a couple of years, we might get bored with the career. We might get retrenched from the organization. We might even be very successful, but not really happy in what we're doing. And to me, those are kind of socio-cultural dimensions of anxiety. And so kind of when treating someone for anxiety, I like to also keep in mind those socio-cultural dimensions of anxiety.
You mentioned a very important point just now, and society provides a lot of context for anxiety. And you also mentioned that sometimes we could feel that we are very successful, but deep down there's this level of emptiness and we're not happy. Why is that the case?
I think that is partially the case because people confuse success and self-actualization. Just because you're successful in what you do doesn't mean that you're going to be a self-actualized person. And so for me, what's very important is to bring the idea of self-actualization back into what we're doing. And self-actualization is really about a more well-rounded person, someone who's actualizing all their potential, not just part of the potential. So yeah, I think that's part of the reason why many people get quite frightened when they found they've been successful, but success doesn't actually give them the adrenaline or the rush that they thought it was going to give them.
Yeah. And self-actualization, what does that feel like? How does somebody know that they have attained this self-actualization mindset?
Well, I think that firstly, no one is ever completely self-actualized. So it's a journey that one's on towards self-actualization. And I think part of there are a number of factors to self-actualization. I think one, which is kind of quite popular at the moment, is the idea of being in a flow with what you're doing, so that you're not kind of distracted or standing back, but you're immersed in the flow of what you're doing. And you're getting kind of, you're not conscious of yourself. You're just flowing with what you're doing. I remember just a story from long ago of an Australian swimmer by the name of Ian Thorpe, who was highly successful as a swimmer. And one day, after having won many medals, he got into the pool and he found himself in his training, instead of kind of having a rigorous training, he found himself looking at the bottom of the pool and staring at a black line at the bottom of the pool. And that's kind of a contrast between self-actualization and not self-actualization. When we're in a flow, we're in self-actualization. But as soon as we get a bit distracted from that, we move out of self-actualization. I think that's one dimension of self-actualization. I think another dimension of self-actualization is the development of character as people. So again, you can be successful, but still be a horrible person, so to speak. And often in organizational literature, we speak about the narcissist as getting to the top of the CEO. And I think being a narcissist is not a well-developed character. Hasn't developed kind of wisdom, humility, and especially hasn't developed the characters of relating to other people. I think another dimension to contrast is, let's say you've been successful and you don't really know what to do next. And you jump back into the boat of being successful. So you try to be successful, then you try to be more successful, then you try to be more and more successful, and you just get caught by this rhythm. Someone who's self-actualized knows how to put success in its place. So an actualized person knows how to develop perspective on all the aspects of their lives, instead of becoming just one-dimensional and focusing only on one dimension of who you are. So it's developing perspective. And in the old days of philosophy, that was called living the good life. to live the good life didn't mean just having pleasure and sitting in the sun and so on. It really meant being able to put one's whole life into perspective, so that one could achieve what's today called well-being in the mental health discourse. Well-being requires all those different aspects as being brought into perspective with each other.
Thank you for sharing these different dimensions. I was wondering if you can shed some light on what these different dimensions could be. You mentioned in order to become a whole person, we should look beyond just looking at our life just in a single lens, right? What are some of the different lenses, perspectives, dimensions people could develop in order to have a more fulfilled life?
So I think that today some of the dimensions are being able to have effective relationships with other people. I think that it also includes a state of kind of finding a stillness in oneself, and not just a busyness, but finding some kind of stillness and calm within ourselves. I think it also means finding meaning in what we do, doing it not just because of the reward that it brings, but doing it because we feel it to be of value to us. And again, going back to another one mentioned earlier, developing a sense of character. And if I just give you an example maybe of someone who with a well-developed character, the person that stands out for me is Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa. He was like really, really well-developed as a person. He had good relationships with others. He was physically in touch with himself. He knew how to see into situations where others were just maybe panicking and being scared. Mandela could see right through the situation and provide perspective on it. So I guess it's people like him, and I suppose it would be figures like Mahatma Gandhi as well, as these are icons. And I'm not saying we can become exactly like them, but these are the icons of people, who were self-actualized and well-developed from all different perspectives. But having said that, there was one perspective that Mandela was unhappy about, and that was his relationship to his immediate family. He didn't feel he didn't see them for 27 years because he was in jail. But that was one area which he wished that he had developed more and more. So the point there again is nobody's completely actualized. We're all on the road to self-actualization, and we all need to give ourselves the opportunity to develop more than just one side of ourselves. And I suppose emotional intelligence would go into that as well, being able to read yourself, being able to read situations, being able to read different contexts. I think those are important for self-actualized people.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very insightful. And I guess in recent years, the search of we've seen a search of self-development books, self-help books. There's many talks of purpose discovery. Many people are talking about the great reevaluation, and it almost feels as though everyone suddenly has this rush into going into their man cave and whatnot to discover their own purpose. Is self-actualization and purpose discovery the same thing? And what is this sudden rush? What do you think that caused it? Is this because of COVID, or is it because many generations have spent quite a long period of time in different workplaces and suddenly realized that the corporate life was not quite what they expected?
So I think all of those things, actually. I think purpose is part of the reason that people are searching more. And I think the search for purpose goes a long way back, actually. I mean, it was really in the 1980s and 1990s that the literature on making meaning was developed. And part of the reason for developing meaning is that meaning, again, well, let's say we've been brought up both in a rational society and in an individualistic society. Rationality is good for helping us calculate. It's good for helping us think logically. It's good for our IQ, but it's not really good for our meaning. It doesn't teach us anything about meaning. And so I think we've developed the rational side of ourselves very well, but we haven't developed the meaning side of ourselves, or we haven't developed the purpose side of ourselves very well. And what the purpose side requires is less rational dominance, but more things like storytelling, or what is your dream? You know, what do you really dream for in your life? And have you ever really given time to yourself to look for what you dream about? You know, I think most of us grow up in this kind of taken for granted idea that we want to, well, I'm not 100% sure about Hong Kong, but let's say Australia and the United States, you want to own 2 cars and a house, you know, and that's the meaning that people have grown up with. But now suddenly we see that that's not enough to give us meaning. And so in that context, you're getting this restlessness and this agitation and this, I don't know what to do next. And I think often it turned to drugs and to alcohol because of not finding this thing called meaning, you know. So I think that for the last, again, about 50, 60 years, we've underestimated the part that meaning plays in our lives. And we've just been busy. And the kind of search for meaning, it disrupts our busyness that we've been into. And we get kind of distracted and bored and start finding ourselves asking questions like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What is this for? You know, and not being satisfied with the answers that come up for those questions. Yeah.
And some of these questions are quite terrifying, right? I remember I went through the same self-discovery journey a couple of years back. A lot of these questions that I asked myself, reflecting on different events, I actually didn't have answers for most of the questions that I was trying to ask myself. So how can we get more people to sort of think in this mindset? And how can we encourage more people to ask themselves more of these uncomfortable questions? And what's the value of really asking ourselves these questions?
So let me say that the kind of questioning that we've been brought up with generally is a very solution-focused form of questioning. So we keep on looking for the solutions to a problem, and that's what we habituated into. But questions of meaning are not solution-focused kinds of questions. They are much more open-ended questions. And so what underpins these questions of meaning is a sense of developing curiosity, a sense of developing kind of wonder, a sense of exploration and adventure without having to know the exact answer at the beginning. We're prepared to let ourselves go on a journey. And interestingly enough, one of the understandings of philosophy is not a theory or concept. It's allowing yourself to go on a journey. And so when we come to meaning, we need to be able to give ourselves permission to go on the journey. But as you say, that's also very frightening. And it's also tied up with a lot of anxiety. And in fact, there are authors that speak about this kind of anxiety as the anxiety of meaninglessness and emptiness. So the challenge is, how do we turn this anxiety of meaninglessness into the opportunity of a creative, curious search for meaning? And I guess that's where a lot of things come into play. I think that coaching or therapy is something that holds people. It allows them to be secure in insecure spaces. So it allows people to bring up their anxiety around meaning. It allows people to talk about anxiety of meaning. And so I think making that point a bit more general, what's crucial is to be able to have dialogue, but dialogue with the people who can appreciate what you're going through when you're going through those questions of meaning. So it's not just reading books. It's also being part of a community of dialogue. And there's a richness just in the dialogue. You know, once you shift from the anxiety to the curiosity, it also is a shift of your emotions. It's a shift of your mindset as well. And you start to enjoy the journey of discovering meaning. And of course, people will discover it in hundreds of different ways. And often people are very surprised by what they discover for themselves on the journey towards meaning. They don't expect what they find. And I think that's part of the journey, is to be willing to explore and not know the end goal at the beginning. And so again, part of our challenge is we have been solutions focused. We haven't been focused, we haven't been encouraged to have an explorer's mindset about our lives and about who we are. Yeah.
No, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I actually had a similar. I had another conversation with a life coach, and his name is Matt Link, about his observation. And one of his observations doing a lot of these coaching with different customers is that he finds that most of his clients really lack self-belief. When they try to engage or explore with their friends, families, and peers, what they are in fact doing are seeking for external validation rather than, like you said, going on a journey, being curious, asking the uncomfortable questions that we might not have answers for, which requires a very different mindset for purpose discovery. Most of the time, we do not have answers, and the point is not to have come up with answers to these questions. And like you were saying during our podcast today, it's really about getting comfortable going on this uncomfortable journey to discover more, and to look at this as a daily exercise almost, right? So why do you think people have, I guess first of all, do you see a similar trend where people nowadays are living with very little self-belief and are constantly looking for that external validation? And if so, why do you think that is the case?
So I think it definitely is the case that most of my clients in therapy and in coaching lack self-belief in themselves, and that many people get caught in seeking external validation. So one of the ways that often happens in a workplace is you want to please people around you, and you want to please your boss, and you want to please everyone around you, but it's never enough. So you need to please them today, you need to please them tomorrow, you need to please them the next day. It's never enough, that external validation. And not only is it never enough, it often gets in the way of being responsible and making the correct decisions. Because someone who, let's say, needs to please others is not going to make decisions just based on the merits of the case. They're going to have in the back of their mind this whole idea of, I need to please him, I need to please her. And so that lack of self-belief has a big impact on people's careers, their relationships, and their development. As to why this is the case, so in terms of the schools out of which I come, it's precisely because of individualism that, like, really on a very deep level, we are on our own. We don't have kind of traditions and rituals for living that surround us. We're so much on our own. And some philosophers call that the anxiety of individualism, you know. So it's a very big burden to bear, to be an individual. I think that's not really recognized very often. We tend to want to celebrate individualism. And of course, I'm not undermining that as well. But what I'm saying is there's the other side to individualism. And that is, we've got no God, we've got no higher authority, we've got no one else but ourselves to take responsibility in situations. And that taking responsibility is very difficult, and it leads us to second guess ourselves, you know. And I think that's what lack of belief in the self is. It's you second guessing yourself the whole time, you know. So I think that to understand lack of belief in oneself, again, one has to understand the socio-cultural context of this radical individualism in which we live today. Yeah.
Let's shift gear and let's dig a bit deeper, I guess, into these two of the areas that you're very passionate about. anxiety and depression. I mean, as humans, we get depressed and we get anxious from time to time, right? But when does it become too much? What are the red flags?
Even intense anxiety can actually be very productive as well. And let me try and unpack that a little bit. Um, um, Intense anxiety is also the basis of discovering new meanings and new purposes in life. So I've done some work in leadership, in coaching leadership with anxiety. And one of the things that often comes up there is that the leaders have kind of come to a limit of one way of leading. Let's say a kind of top-down leading. They've come to the limit of it, but they actually don't know how to carry on anymore. And so they're stuck in this way of leading, top-down leading. They don't know where to turn. And because they don't know where to turn, that's huge anxiety. They don't know how to carry on. If they reject the anxiety and just try and carry on, they might drink more alcohol, or they might drink more drugs, or build up other defensive. On the other hand, if they prepare to go through the painful and anguishing sense of anxiety, it opens different ways of leading. So I've kind of seen people come in with top-down leadership styles and going out with a much more coaching and facilitative leader style, and really enjoy working in that way as a kind of coaching leader. And that's where I think anxiety is really transformational. I think in organizations, there's often talk about transformation, but really transformation is a huge thing. It requires really working through your present mindset, letting go of your present mindset, being in the kind of abyss of the unknown, and developing a new mindset from there. So I think anxiety is very crucial
Yeah.
there.
So it's almost like we need to separate ourselves, our awareness, with the emotion, like the feeling of anxiety, and then asking those questions about why are we feeling anxious in certain ways, and really use that anxiety as a motivator and sort of turn that into actions, right?
Yes. We need to, I've coined a term, I call it anxitement. Anxitement. And what anxitement is, it contains both anxiety and excitement at the same time. And I think the key is to get that anxitement going. The anxiety on its own is very painful. Connecting it with anxitement, with excitement, is coming out of the abyss and kind of developing a new sense of purpose, a new understanding of oneself, I guess, in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's a beautiful word. And incitement. It's almost associating, I don't know if I'm coining the right term here. So it's almost having a default association between anxiety and excitement. So every time you feel anxious, and straight away you associate with the feeling of excitement. I had a recent experience with my older son. So he's 3.5. He's been acting out. Is that terrible 2, terrible 3, terrible 4? The different terminologies that as parents we try to give to the next generation to try to rationalize their behaviors. But I did a change, and it was quite profound. So I started associating my son with a mirror. So every time he does something sort of that used to frustrate me or used to irritate me, straight away I no longer focus on the behavior. I can't even see the behavior. I only see a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw an image of myself. And I sort of had to change that narrative or that belief system in me, in that, children is just a sponge. What they see, they do. And their behaviors is just a product of the environments of the parenting or the education. And by using this association technique, that really changed my perspective and my relationship with him, because I no longer get frustrated when he acts out these days. Oh, so that's been one of my recent discoveries about parenting, along many others.
Yeah.
Stephen, I want to ask you about anxiety and depression, and I want to understand a bit more about what actually happens inside our body when we feel anxious or depressed or even unhappy.
So I think when it comes to anxiety, there's kind of a tightening of the whole body. I often find with clients, their hands are not open. Their hands are fists, and they don't realize that their hands are fists. And then I think there's also heart palpitations that go on, and sweaty forehead and sweaty body in anxiety. In fact, I don't know if you ever saw that movie Analyze Us with Robert De Niro. And Robert De Niro was a mafia boss, and he started kind of hyperventilating in the scene in the movie, and then he started having pain in his chest, and then he started getting very frightened about it, and he got one of his sidekicks to take him to the hospital, and in the hospital they did all the tests on him, and the doctor came back to him and said, "Don't worry, you're not having a heart attack. You've just got anxiety." And Robert De Niro looked at him and said, "Anxiety? Me have anxiety? Me, the mafia boss, have anxiety? You don't know what you're talking about." And the next thing, he was hitting the doctor. And it was done in a comical kind of way. But the point here is that often people don't want to recognize. It's harder to recognize anxiety often than it is to say recognize a heart attack, because the thing again about anxiety, when one is caught in the middle of an anxiety attack, there's nothing that you can hold on to, and so you feel extremely powerless in a state of anxiety. So those are some of. There's also agitation, agitation in one's legs as well, are some of the body signs more of anxiety. I think in terms of depression, there's often a feeling that I'm lazy. Often my clients will come in to say they're lazy, rather than actually understanding that the laziness is an effect of depression. When you're feeling really depressed, it's hard to get up in the morning. It's difficult to get up off the chair, and it also can be difficult to eat, or it can also be overeating as well. And I think people often talk slower in a depressed state. So I think those are some of the indicators of anxiety and depression.
Yeah. I often have days where I don't want to get up, but it rarely, I guess, prolong and lasts for a period of time. What are some of the preventions and solutions to combat against this feeling of anxiety and depression? What are some of the things people can do more of? And I guess if they do feel the anxiety or even depression, what can they do about it? So just now you mentioned there were days that we don't feel like waking up. I mean, every now and then I get one of those days, to be honest. I think everyone does, right?
So I mean, what's often said is that it needs to persist for at least a period of 2 weeks every day to be counted as depression. So all of us have 1 or 2 days that we don't want to get up, but it's the duration of it. I'm not sure that in terms of what we can do, I would like to say what can we do to work with it rather than work against it. So I think that there are so many practices of working against it, you know. I mean, people will overwork, will be one way of kind of trying to push the anxiety aside. People will do, I've had a client who does exercise for 6 hours a day, kind of to combat the anxiety in himself. And it does combat it for him, but he needs to do this for every day, just about, for so many hours.
Wow, 6 hours is a lot of time.
It's a lot of time. So these are all defensive responses. I think the first thing to do is to be able to recognize that you're having anxiety, and I think it's not so easy to recognize that you're having anxiety. Let me put it in the context of anger. Usually people who have anger management issues don't see that their anger comes from themselves. They think it comes from the situation. So they think that others are causing their anger. They don't see that they are responding with intense anger. And so one of the keys is look at, is the anger disproportionate to the situation? Is the anger much more than is demanded in the situation? And it's the same kind of thing with anxiety. Is my response to the situation disproportionate? Like let's say when I started lecturing, actually, I had quite a bit of anxiety. And one of the things I used to do was to over-prepare for a lecture. And I over-prepared. And then when I got into the class, I let go of all my preparations and just kind of responded spontaneously. So that's just another practice of disproportion. I didn't need to prepare as much as I did prepare. So I think some of the signs to watch out for is kind of the disproportionate over-preparing or disproportionate anger or disproportionate driving. These are some of the signs to listen for in anxiety. And there are hundreds of others. The key is it's disproportionate. Yeah.
I love that part where you mentioned about sort of the proportion of our emotions and how is that relative to the stimuli that we face, right? And I remember sitting in so many of the classes, because of the depth of your knowledge, I often got lost because there's so much there to learn. There's so much there, so much to absorb from your knowledge. I want to focus on the future now. So we talked about the individualism, and that's driving everyone towards a busy life. It only gets busier. And you shared a number of stories: Robert De Niro, Ian Thorpe, Nelson Mandela. Great narratives. I love those. So I sort of want to talk about the solutions, sort of what we can do as a community to support each other. Obviously, different people wear different hats. Some of us are leaders. Some of us, like myself, we're parents. Like yourself, you just have your first grandchild, right? Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
So given that we know what people are struggling with mental health, and we're also seeing a trend that more people are opening up to the issues, because I think before people would be afraid that they would be stigmatized if they were to come out and say they had mental health issues. But I see that people are proactively coming out to say that they actually had an issue, and they're using their own trauma, their life lesson, to help other people who are also in need, right? So I really much like to learn from you. For example, as a leader or manager who are leading teams, whether it is a big teams or individual contributors, how can we support our team members in the workplace, given this sort of hybrid work and sort of this moment of the great reevaluation, whatever you might want to call it. Look, as a leader, what can we do? As a parent like myself, or even grandparent like yourself, how can we nurture and support the next generation, right, in the search of meaning? And for principals and school teachers, right, how can they better prepare and sort of educate not just the rational side of their students, but also the emotional side, to facilitate that maturity, so that they can go on their own self-discovery journey. So three perspectives as leaders and managers. So what can they do in the workplace as parents, and also as educators? What can we do to support the next generation?
I'm not sure that my answer is going to be specific enough, but I'll just start out with it and see where it goes. In ancient Greece, there was this idea of know yourself. And it wasn't just one or two people. It was kind of painted all over ancient Athens. Know yourself. So what was present in ancient Athens was that actually knowing yourself is something that you start off from at an early age, really at that age where you start to become conscious of yourself in what you're doing. Our society hasn't given much value or credit to the notion of knowing yourself. So I think that any practice of knowing oneself is important for dealing with our children, dealing with the people. Do we know ourselves? And as leaders, are we really committed to bringing out the best in other people? In other words, are we willing to bring out some self-actualizing parts of other people? So I think that at the moment, the kind of dominant forums in which anxiety is dealt with are kind of meditative practices, psychotherapy, some coaching, and I think that we're also seeing little groups of people getting together to form a circle to discuss the lived experience of anxiety. And so I think that we need to be able to kind of say, knowing yourself is not a crime. It doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you. it's in fact a normal part of everyday living, is to work towards knowing ourselves. And we've forgotten that, and we need to return that into our lives from an early age onwards.
Yep. Great, Stephen. Learned a ton today from you, and there's so much to think about. Because on and off, people come to me with different issues. For instance, I had a lady who came to me, and she opened up and told me that she tried to commit suicide about a year ago. Recently got diagnosed with bipolar. So many people are having different sorts of mental health issues. But for a lot of these people, there's no one they could turn to. And I think today you really spend a lot of time just clarifying, how did we get to this stage, right? This whole individualism and sort of the new values, the impacts that I guess technologies have also brought to our life. Sort of the definition around anxiety and depression. And you also corrected me, instead of thinking about how to combat against them, we should really be thinking about how can we work with them? How can we identify them, separate from those emotions, and explore them? Why are we feeling certain ways, and really try to use them as motivators and turn them into actions, right? I think that's often an area where a lot of people struggle with. So recently, just before we close off, our session. So recently, I started asking, some random questions, to all my podcast guests, and I thought I'll also try that with you, because I think that's quite interesting, and people can also know more about you as well. So if you're ready, Stephen, I'm just going to ask you three questions on the fly. What is your favorite question that you like to ask yourself?
Well, that stumped me.
So, yeah.
I think that the favorite question that I like to ask myself is, I think it's got a lot to do with my being on the journey. It's am I paying enough attention to the journey that I'm on? What are the ways I'm trying to escape my journey? Because again, I don't think it's either or. It's kind of, one's on the journey, one gets off the journey. So am I on the journey? What is the purpose of the journey? I think that these questions have actually followed me ever since I was a teenager, because actually I had anxiety quite early on in my life, in my 16, 17, 18, and I think from there I've developed this kind of sense of, am I on the journey? Is it exciting? Is it full of ancitement? Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. Second question. Sorry, I'm thinking. Can you give us a quick hack or quick shortcut when someone feels anger? What's the quick thing? What is that one quick thing which you like to do, or you've seen somebody doing, that can sort of give them an extra moment that they can process this anger before they commit to an action?
Yeah. Okay. So the whole key, as you've said, is that just that moment that people can tune into in themselves. I guess I think it's a discipline. It's a discipline of learning to listen to your body. I think that I sometimes I'm angry and it gets the better of me. you know. But sometimes I'm angry, but there's another voice inside of me saying, hang on, just watch out a little bit, you know. And that kind of gives me the moment. I think that tactics that people sometimes use is kind of getting off the chair and walking around the block or something like that every time one's in an angry mode of doing some kind of little rituals or behaviors that allow things to settle down a little bit more. Yeah.
Stephen, I gotta say, every time I see you on and off camera, you're so composed. It's very hard for me to even envisage that you ever get angry. So my final question is, now that you have a grandchild, what is the one thing that you want to teach him or her?
So it's actually two grandchildren.
Oh, you got two. Sorry.
My daughter had twins. What I'd like to teach them is love. That's what I would like to have them up. Love and learning to look after themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what for me, I think in today's world, you have to be able to look after yourself. It doesn't matter. You can be married. You still need to be able to look after yourself, and that comes right back to the beginning again of individualism. You know, we have to look after ourselves. We can't expect our spouse to look after us, or if they do support us, and then we get divorced, how are we going to cope with that situation? So for me, it's like I try and instill in my kids a sense of love, and also that they must be able to look after themselves. Yeah.
Perfect and wonderful. Stephen, thank you so much for taking your time out to have a chat and have a conversation with me. I've learned a lot from you, whether it was 12, 13 years ago or this conversation. And thank you for, I think, clarifying how important it is for everyone to learn a bit more about what is happening around the world and the implications all of these technologies and noises, distractibility, which have on our life. And I think that's very important. And and again, congratulations to your two grandchildren. Hopefully I can make my way back to Australia sometime this year, if not next year. And I think it would be great to finally have a coffee with you after so many years.
It would be lovely. Yeah. That would be great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Stephen.